like this, and it feels good to dress casually.
All right. Lord knows that you've worn a tie almost every day of your life for 34 years.
Yep, 5 days a week and on Sunday as well, and I can't say that I miss down to 1 day a week now.
All right. Well, so far, your first few days of retirement going well?
Yes, I thoroughly enjoy going to bed at night and noticing I don't set the alarm, and getting up in the morning and knowing I usually don't have to be someplace at a certain time. I miss the people at work, and I miss the people that I would contact in the process of doing the news. But I haven't missed appearing on television, not yet anyway. And I frankly hope that I can become somewhat more anonymous in the community. This is something that you and I and everybody who appears on television has to live with, is that you are forever recognized as you walk down a street or into a restaurant or something like that. This, however, is probably the best place on earth for that to happen, because Iowans are polite and well-mannered, and I've said it before, but I'll say it again, that in all our years here, I have never been embarrassed in public or abused or treated with anything but great kindness. And that is just not true every place. It's not true many places at all.
That's right.
But I really thank the people of Iowa for their traditional good manners.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in a little town of Joyce in northern Iowa. Went all through school there. And I listened to WMT radio, which was the only WMT at the time, back in the 1930s, I suppose. We could pick up WCCO in Minneapolis, WHO in Des Moines, and WMT in Cedar Rapids. Well, WGN and a few other places. And I used to flip across the dial, but I had no idea of making a career out of broadcasting at that time. But I do remember WMT, and Cedar Rapids at the time seemed like a big metropolitan Emerald City compared to a town of 250 people where I grew up.
So from Joyce, you went to college?
Went to college at St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota, and that's where I started in broadcasting. St. Olaf has a station, the first station west of the Mississippi, incidentally. And one day early in my sophomore year, was pushed by a friend to go over and audition at the radio station, and I did, and was taken into a class for a couple of weeks, and then put on the air, and that's the way it started. And it kind of was gradual. I didn't necessarily intend to make a career out of broadcasting even then. But
what had you thought you might do?
I thought I was going to be a teacher. And after college, I did go to graduate school with that in mind. But due to a number of reasons, I frankly liked broadcasting better than I liked academia. And frankly, I haven't regretted it.
And how did you get that first job?
Well, I told you about the job in college. Mm-hmm. And then when I went on to graduate school, I walked over to KSTP in Minneapolis one day and asked if they needed any help as an announcer. That was what we're all called. Everybody was an announcer in those days. There was no anchorman, had not even been invented. And reporters hadn't really been invented. That term was really not used in broadcasting that I remember. We used the term newsman, and of course they were all men at that time too. But the newsmen at the time, for the most part, would sit on the telephone. And some would go to the city hall and things like that, and the sophisticated ones would carry a tape recorder with them. But I worked at two stations then in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Then I decided we were expecting a family by this time, and I had decided on broadcasting. So I sent around some tapes and went to work at KOB in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
You answered an ad in Broadcasting Magazine.
Yep. Yep.
So you just applied.
Just applied. And one place that gave me a good response was KOB in Albuquerque. And that was a long ways away, and boy, that sounded interesting. And
this was radio.
This was radio, and with the understanding there'd be a little television, and there was. That's about the way it worked out. But it was mostly radio then. Then I went to Omaha, and that started in radio, but ended up doing more television. And though newscasts were generally written by the news department then, a newscaster there named Ray Clark, who was their primetime evening newscaster, did a lot of writing himself. And I got into filling in for him. And I like to write. I always like to write. So since he wrote, I wrote, and I got a lot of practice writing newscasts then. And I did weekends, and I substituted for him. But I wanted to get a primetime newscast myself, and that's how I happened to come here to WMT.
And there was some sort of a WMT connection, was there not? That somebody heard about you and there was a fellow acquaintance?
A newscaster who used to work in Cedar Rapids, and I believe at KCRG, and I have racked my brain to try to remember his name, and I can't do it. He came to Omaha and somehow put a bug in the ear of the people back here at WMT that if they were looking for somebody, they ought to give me a call. And they did, and I came over for an interview, and that's how I got started here.
And you interviewed with the man himself, Bill Quarton.
Bill Quarton, Lou Van Ostrand, Chuck Wister, Doug Grant. And that's a pretty good group.
Well, in fact, all of them are now in the WMT Radio Hall of Fame, of which you were inducted into last month.
Yeah, it's a pretty good company.
I would say so.
Yeah.
Do you remember getting any marching orders? We're going to hire you, and this is what we expect of you?
Not really. Seems to me Bill Quarton, or maybe it was Lou, said, well, do the best you can. Young fella, maybe they said, as I was at the time.
You were about 33, were you not?
Boy, I'd have to think. No, I would have been about 31.
31.
31 then. And I just sat down and pitched in and wrote newscasts. And back in those days, the newscaster wrote every word that went out over the air. And that was not as much of a job as it seemed to be. After a while, you got pretty adept at writing a newscast. But there were no tape to go with it. Very few sound bites, though we did have sound cameras in. But they were used sparingly, and some days not at all. The visuals material that we had was usually black and white still photos. I do remember that everybody in the newsroom was then issued a little Brownie flash camera. Now, I told this to a young reporter the other day, and he or she didn't even know what a Brownie was. Boy, are we dated, huh? Or am I dated?
No, I remember the Brownies.
You do remember the Brownie. Well, they were very inexpensive.
Kodak cameras.
Yeah, Kodak cameras, very durable. And we were all issued one of those, and if we came across an accident or wanted to take a picture of somebody, we would do that. And that was what the standard GI photographic gear was in the newsroom at that time. And as Bob Bruner noted in our 40th anniversary, much of the newscast would be the newscaster appearing on television, his face, and then on a couple newscasts, the noon at that time, there was only one camera. So the pictures would be out over here, and that camera would swing over and shoot that picture and swing back to Bob, when he was done talking to that. I imagine it was people watching at that time didn't think much about it, but you'd get a little seasick.
It would seem funny today, wouldn't it? Well, your career has sort of paralleled the growth of television, starting out as black and white, using still photographs, and going to film, and then videotape, and then today satellites, and who knows what's down the line.
Yes, the technological changes have, I don't know how to describe how many there have been and how revolutionary they have been. But it seems to me that there's been a whole changeover about every decade, at least, maybe more often than that. I guess there's just no tool that we use now that we used when I started. Typewriters, we don't even use pens and pencils anymore. Cameras are different, microphones, everything. There's just no piece of equipment left anymore. The way of doing things, of course, has changed a lot too. With small cameras, we can go any place easily, and we do. My goodness, satellites, the whole world is wired. It's just altogether different. Nobody envisioned, I don't think, back in the 50s when I got started, that it would be like it is today.
Well, I've heard you talk several times as you have approached your retirement about your career, and you've always been asked, what do you remember the most, what event, what important person? And your answer to that usually is, it's not so much events or important people, but the people themselves of Iowa.
Yes, I think that's right. Ordinary people are what we live among most of the time, and we can understand them. Some very ordinary people also turn out to be exceptional leaders. I've gotten to know some senators and governors, particularly. I've met presidents, but I wouldn't pretend to suggest that I know them at all. But I've known some very important and able people, leaders in this world, who are basically ordinary people, no different from my neighbor across the street or next door. I'm not sure that's a startling discovery, but you come to realize that in time. The old cliche is they put on their pants one leg at a time. And the fact is we're all very similar, but some have some extraordinary capacities in there too. These people who in Iowa who have coped with floods as they have, and disasters and personal tragedies of one sort or another, or have hit it big some way. It's always struck me how graceful and graciously they have accepted hardship and not gotten too excited over great fortune when it occurs. That's the kind of character I guess I'm most comfortable with myself. And I have enjoyed seeing how Iowans have reacted in these circumstances, and I applaud them for their good sense and their good manners.
In the news business that I have known, which postdates you a little bit, I have seen the comings and goings of many people. You must have seen literally hundreds of people come and go that have been your colleagues. Is that somewhat mind-boggling that you have sort of been the steady rock, and then all these young folks are hither and yon?
No, it doesn't seem mind-boggling. I have, it's just the way it is. I guess I wouldn't know it any other way, and we all know our own experience and are comfortable with that. Known some very nice people gone through, some very able ones have gone through. Famous one, Dick Threlkeld, made had a distinguished career, is having a distinguished career in broadcast journalism. He was very able. We've had some other very able people that I worked with too over the years. Martin Jensen, Grant Price, Conrad, and Tate, of course. They were Tate is a memorable character as well, and there have been a lot of memorable characters, but probably none more memorable than Tate Cummins. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed him.